Hans chuckled coldly and casually asked whether that stubborn old fool still hadn't shown up yet. After that, the group walked out of the building together and headed outside into the open courtyard. Without any care, Hans lifted the rooster high into the air and then dropped him directly onto the hard stone ground below. The rooster lay there feeling extremely frustrated and angry. Inwardly, he cursed the fact that none of his abilities worked in this strange world. Fortunately, his body was naturally tough, allowing him to survive the fall and barely avoid being killed. Meanwhile, Arthur heard a loud noise outside and quickly rushed out to investigate. What he saw made his heart stop. His granddaughter Rosalie was lying on the ground before him, badly injured. Arthur immediately ran toward her in panic. But just as he was about to reach her, a glowing cage made of golden light suddenly appeared, blocking his path and preventing him from getting closer. The moment he touched the barrier, Arthur cried out in pain as the force hurled him backward like a cannonball. Fortunately, Old Master Youssef arrived at that very moment and managed to catch Arthur before he crashed into the ground. Furious at the sight before him, Old Master Youssef raised his voice and angrily demanded to know who dared to cause trouble within his residence. Floating calmly in the air, surrounded by a cold and intimidating aura, the head of the Chu family spoke coldly. He accused Arthur of killing his granddaughter Carla. Meanwhile, the rooster watched in horror as a ring of golden light appeared around his neck and slowly began tightening. Hans declared arrogantly that he had come to the Lin residence today to settle a blood debt with blood. He swore that every member of the Lin family, young or old, would be buried alongside his granddaughter. Recognizing Hans as the ruthless elder of the Chu clan, Old Master Youssef realized with a sinking heart that even if they combined their strength, they still wouldn't be able to defeat him. Hans looked at Arthur with a sinister smile and asked whether they intended to compensate for the death of his granddaughter. He threatened that if Arthur refused to hand over that foolish grandson of Youssef's, he would wipe out the entire Lin clan. Arthur's anger immediately flared. He shouted that he would fight Hans to the very end and would never betray the grandson of his master. Hans burst into arrogant laughter and began mocking Arthur. Even though Arthur had reached the middle stage of the martial ancestor realm, Hans clearly didn't see him as a real threat. He proudly bragged about his own strength as a martial monarch expert and sneered that Arthur was simply courting death by daring to challenge him. Then, to make his threat even clearer, Hans lifted the rooster higher into the air and declared that if they disobeyed him, they would watch Arthur's granddaughter Rosalie die before their eyes. Old Master Youssef stepped forward angrily and demanded that Hans stop this madness immediately. Hans smirked and asked whether Youssef truly refused to sacrifice his brainless grandson in order to save everyone else. Youssef coldly accused Hans of trying to trade his grandson's life in exchange for the life of a servant's granddaughter. In truth, Youssef understood that even if they surrendered Levi, Hans would still destroy the entire Lin clan for revenge. Just as Rosalie's life seemed to be slipping away, Old Master Youssef was about to reluctantly accept Hans's demands. At that moment, Levi suddenly walked out of the house and casually asked what everyone was arguing about. Hans glanced at the boy and quickly noticed that the Lin family's so-called useless grandson looked rather foolish and slow-witted. Levi looked around with confusion, but then his eyes suddenly lit up when he noticed a chicken nearby. The rooster, now trapped and powerless, struggled helplessly to break free but couldn't escape the glowing restraint around his neck. When Levi called him a chicken again, the rooster felt overwhelming humiliation. As a powerful demonic beast who had been transformed into a human woman, he felt like he might die from embarrassment seeing himself in such a pitiful state before this cruel enemy. Trying desperately to calm himself, the rooster kept repeating in his mind that he was not a chicken. He was simply a powerless human trapped in this ridiculous situation. Hans laughed mockingly at Levi and commented that judging by his reaction, the boy seemed to like this rooster quite a lot. With a cruel grin, Hans challenged Levi directly, asking whether he dared to exchange his own life as ransom. Levi simply chuckled softly, which surprised Hans greatly. He had never expected the boy to agree so easily. Levi calmly replied that he was already walking toward Hans anyway. As Levi stepped forward, Hans's eyes flashed with murderous intent, clearly ready for a deadly confrontation. Arthur couldn't stop the tears from falling as he wondered what kind of virtue his family possessed to deserve such loyalty and sacrifice from Levi. In that moment, Arthur truly felt that his life had not been lived in vain. Determined to protect him, Arthur rushed forward toward Levi, refusing to allow the young master to sacrifice himself for their sake. Old Master Yusef quietly warned Levi in a low voice, reminding him of the dangers ahead and the limits of the indestructible diamond body he had cultivated for so many years. He explained that while Levi's body might withstand attacks from ordinary cultivators, Hans had already reached the terrifying martial monarch realm. Facing him directly could even destroy Levi's soul. Levi listened to the two old men with a confused expression, clearly not understanding what they were talking about. Despite their warnings, Levi remained confident that everything would be fine and calmly stepped forward. Hans watched the boy approach with a mocking expression, expecting the fight to end quickly and easily. Arthur cried out in horror and tried to stop him, but he was too late. Tears streamed down his face as he watched Levi walk forward bravely. Old Master Yusef trembled as he stood there, shocked by the courage of his grandson. In his heart, he felt that such bravery truly belonged to a descendant of the Lin family. Just then, another armed group entered the courtyard of Yusef's residence, and a rare expression of relief appeared on the old master's face. He quickly recognized them as members of the warrior alliance. Among them was Chief Frel, a powerful martial monarch. With his arrival, perhaps the crisis could finally be resolved. Three powerful figures stepped forward, each radiating an aura as strong as Hans's. At the front stood Frel, the leader of the warrior alliance. Beside him were their honored guest, the respected Grandmaster Samuel, and the alliance's talented student, Skylar. Arthur's tense expression softened slightly as he thought that with these three powerful elders present, the old master might finally stand a chance against Hans. Old Master Yusef immediately expressed his gratitude, sincerely thanking Chief Frel for coming to deliver justice for the Lin family. Frel answered calmly and told him that there was no need to thank him for doing his duty. He explained in a serious tone that he had come here today for only one purpose, to restore justice. Hearing this, Yusef quickly explained the entire situation. He described how Carla and her group had invaded his residence to steal their family treasure and were killed during the conflict. He also mentioned that their bodies had already been reported and handed over to the Alliance. Frel took a deep breath and interrupted him. Calmly but firmly, he explained that justice was not the same as revenge and asked whether it was true that the Lin family had killed Carla. Frel's cold attitude caused Yusef's expression to change slightly. However, Frel continued speaking coldly, saying that if Levi had truly killed someone's granddaughter, then Elder Chu had every reason to seek revenge. Arthur stared at him in disbelief and asked how such reasoning could possibly be fair. Yusef tried to explain that Carla and her group had attacked first. If his grandson had not been strong enough to fight back, the entire Lin clan would have been wiped out that very day. Frel let out a sharp, icy laugh. Looking around with clear indifference, he calmly pointed out that aside from a few guards and household servants, every member of the Lin family was still alive and well. In his eyes, that meant the Lin family had suffered no meaningful loss at all, and he spoke as if the whole incident was hardly worth making a fuss about. Yusef's voice dropped low and heavy as he faced the chieftain. His eyes carried deep sorrow as he spoke about the servants who had been slaughtered before the intruders even reached the main hall. Those people, he said, had served the Lin family faithfully for years. With visible pain, he asked how the chieftain could speak about their deaths so coldly, as if their lives meant nothing. The chief showed no trace of sympathy. His expression remained completely indifferent as he dismissed the matter with a shrug, saying they were only a handful of insignificant lives that hardly deserved attention. He then countered the point that old Master Yusef had been emphasizing. In his opinion, the situation could not be compared so simply, especially since the other side had killed one of the Chu family's most promising young talents. The man tilted his head slightly and asked in a calm but mocking tone whether the Lin family truly believed this situation could be considered a fair and balanced exchange. Yusef's anger began to rise uncontrollably. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. With a trembling voice, he questioned how anyone could evaluate the situation in such a cold and twisted way. Frel, however, remained completely composed. Without the slightest hesitation, he declared that the Lin family must hand over the life of their grandson to Elder Chu as compensation. After a brief pause, he added coldly that sacrificing just one life would not be nearly enough to settle the matter. He explained that the Chu family had lost a rare genius, someone with extraordinary potential. Because of that, he demanded 2 lives in return, the rebellious grandson of the Lin family, and 1 additional life from their household. Frel then casually suggested that Arthur's granddaughter could serve as suitable compensation for Elder Chu's grief. At the same time, he ordered the Lin family to hand over the sacred scroll as well, as if making such demands were the most natural thing in the world. Old Master Yusef's fury finally exploded. With a powerful strike of his staff against the ground, the stone floor cracked open beneath him, the impact echoing loudly through the hall. His eyes burned with anger as he loudly denounced them, calling them shameless villains who had completely abandoned any sense of honor. The 2 men standing beside the leader quickly stepped forward, trying to calm the enraged old master. They urged him not to be so stubborn and insisted that their leader's proposal was actually very reasonable. Quoting Buddhist teachings in a hypocritical tone, they advised him to let go of worldly attachments and free himself from suffering. According to them, clinging to possessions and family ties was simply a kind of spiritual illness. Hearing those words only made Old Master Yusef even angrier. He shouted that they were nothing but greedy hypocrites. They had massacred innocent people just to obtain the Lin scroll, yet they still dared to talk about Buddhism and Taoism. In his eyes, they were a disgrace to the very teachings they pretended to follow. The chieftain did not seem bothered by the outburst at all. He calmly acknowledged that the scroll was indeed one of the highest scriptures of martial arts. Then he warned that if Old Master Yusef refused to hand it over, the Lin family should prepare themselves to face the consequences. At that moment, Frel's eyes darkened ominously. A dangerous expression appeared on his face as he slowly prepared to make his move. Without warning, he raised his weapon and pointed it straight at the rooster. But just as he was about to strike, Levi calmly lifted his hand and effortlessly caught the weapon in mid-motion. In a relaxed voice, he warned Frel not to throw things around so carelessly, adding that someone might accidentally get hurt if he kept acting like that. The Grandmaster watching the scene could hardly believe what he had just witnessed. Shock spread across his face as he realized that Levi had actually blocked the chieftain's primordial power with ease. Thinking back on that moment, Hans fell into deep thought, clearly trying to process what he had just seen. He admitted quietly that Levi's movements had been so fast and blurry that even he, with all his experience, could not see them clearly. Both the members of the Warrior Alliance and Hans silently reached the same conclusion. Yusef's grandson was definitely not someone who could be underestimated. After a brief silence, Hans lowered his voice and stated that he had not been completely unreasonable that day. He explained that if the Lin family simply compensated him with the life of his granddaughter, he would be willing to drop any further demands. Frel frowned slightly as he considered the situation. If even Hans had decided to back down a little, then this young man in front of them must possess something truly unusual. He quietly admitted that perhaps they had acted a bit too rashly. In the end, he stated that Rosalie's life alone should be enough to settle the matter. Arthur stared at them in disbelief, struggling to accept what he had just heard. He could not believe they were actually planning to take his granddaughter's life as compensation. Frel calmly declared that the issue would be resolved in this way. If Old Master Yusef still refused to agree, he warned that Elder Chu would pursue the Lin family relentlessly until the end. Listening to their endless arguments, the rooster finally grew furious. After hearing everything they said, he came to a simple conclusion. These people clearly intended to kill him. Old Master Yusef and Arthur exchanged heavy looks. With great reluctance and sorrow, they both realized that sacrificing Rosalie might be the only way to end the conflict. At that moment, Levi suddenly reached forward and grabbed the ring tightly around the rooster's neck. With a single casual movement, he squeezed it so hard that the magical ring began to crack and fracture. Levi glanced down at the rooster and jokingly called him a chicken. Noticing that the creature had shrunk noticeably, he casually suggested they should head home and eat something. After all, he said, if a hen gets sick, she won't lay eggs. The rooster desperately tried to escape from Levi's grip, struggling with all his strength, But no matter how hard he tried, he simply could not break free. Suddenly, a furious roar echoed from behind Levi. It was Hans, enraged that Levi had not even offered the girl's life to the Chu family as compensation. With murderous intent flashing in his eyes, the man lunged forward toward the boy, preparing to strike him down with a powerful spell. Sensing Elder Chu's terrifying killing intent, the rooster panicked and shouted that he was now just an ordinary person and was absolutely terrified of dying. Levi casually waved his hand and effortlessly intercepted Chu's attack. Then he spoke sternly, telling him not to bully his little chicken. Everyone present stared in stunned disbelief. They had just watched Levi casually block the powerful strike of a peak monarch as if it were nothing. Hans was completely furious now. Grinding his teeth, he declared that he would personally deal with the boy himself. Raising his burning hands in front of his face, he glared at Levi with a terrifying expression. In the next moment, his body rose into the air as bright lightning began to crackle violently from his hands. As Chu's aura erupted fiercely, the overwhelming pressure filled the surroundings, making it difficult for the people nearby to even breathe. Yusef's face turned pale when he recognized the technique. Chu was preparing to unleash his infamous move, the Golden Demonic Killing Thunder. Until that moment, it had always been believed that anyone struck by this attack would die without exception. The rooster, now reduced to an ordinary human body, had absolutely no chance of surviving such a devastating strike from a warrior monarch. Overwhelmed by the terrifying energy, he lost his balance and tumbled off Levi's shoulder. Levi immediately turned around with concern, quickly checking on the little chicken. At that exact moment, the deadly lightning strike slammed directly into Levi's back. Hans laughed coldly, clearly furious that he had been forced to use his famous ultimate technique against such a young opponent. In his mind, Levi absolutely deserved to die. Yet strangely, the terrifying attack did not even disturb a single strand of Levi's hair. He stood there perfectly fine, looking completely unharmed. When Levi casually remarked that the lightning actually felt quite pleasant on his body, the elder almost exploded with rage. Hans stared in horror as he realized that Levi had taken the full force of the attack without suffering the slightest injury. What shocked him even more was that the young man appeared to have absorbed the Golden Demonic Killing Thunder entirely. Suddenly hearing the weak whimper of the small chicken behind him, Levi quickly turned around in alarm. Seeing that the demon chicken had been injured, he rushed over anxiously and asked if it was all right. The rooster cursed silently in his heart, thinking that a human body was simply too fragile to handle this kind of battle. But after checking himself, he realized the injuries were actually quite serious, and he might need to pass out for a while to recover. At that moment, only one terrible thought filled Levi's mind. The chicken was dead. Old Master Yusef and Arthur could only stand there helplessly, watching everything unfold with tears slowly forming in their eyes. Hans stared at Levi as if he were looking at something completely unnatural. Shock and disbelief filled his face when he realized that the boy had actually absorbed his golden demonic thunder. To him, that should have been absolutely impossible. Yet before he could even finish processing the thought, Levi suddenly moved. His body flashed forward like a streak of lightning, and in the blink of an eye he was already standing right in front of Hans. Levi's expression darkened instantly. A sharp killing intent surged out of him as he accused Hans of harming his little chicken, his voice trembling with anger that he could no longer hide. Before Hans even had time to react or raise his guard, Levi's fist shot forward at terrifying speed and smashed directly into his jaw. The force behind Levi's punch was overwhelming. The powerful monarch was instantly sent flying high into the air like a ragdoll, completely unable to resist the blow. The three remaining warriors watched the scene unfold, their faces turning pale with fear as they realized just how easily Hans had been defeated. After dealing with Hans, Levi slowly turned his head toward the three warriors. His eyes were cold and unfriendly as his voice echoed through the area, addressing them with clear hostility. He bluntly accused them of plotting together to kill his little chicken, and the anger in his voice made it obvious that he would not let the matter go so easily. Before Frel even had the chance to open his mouth and respond, Levi's figure suddenly blurred and appeared right in front of them. Levi glared at them and declared that they were no different from Hans. Without hesitation, he swung his fist and struck the Alliance leader with brutal force. The blow was so powerful that the man's body was launched backward and slammed violently into the stone wall behind him. Samuel noticed Levi's attack at the last moment and instinctively raised his arm to block it, but it was already too late to stop what was coming. Meanwhile, Skylar felt a chill run down his spine. His hair stood on end as Levi slowly turned his gaze toward him. Terrified, he immediately began begging Levi not to kill his master. However, before he could even finish his sentence, Levi's fist drove straight into his stomach with crushing force. The three Monarch-level warriors were beaten until they were barely alive. The students of the Alliance stared in shock, unable to believe what they were witnessing. In their minds, monarchs were figures who should never be defeated so easily. Levi calmly cracked his knuckles, his voice cold as he declared that anyone who dared harm his little chicken would receive the same treatment. Meanwhile, when the students learned about Skylar's death, many of them broke down into tears. The surrounding men watched in horror as Levi struck down the warrior with a single blow, realizing how terrifying his strength truly was. Panic quickly spread through the crowd. Screaming in fear, many of them turned and ran away from the place as fast as they could. Meanwhile, Levi calmly walked back toward the rooster, kneeling beside it to carefully check its condition. The rooster could hardly believe what was happening. Never in his life had he imagined that a human would one day worry about him so sincerely. Levi's eyes turned red as he muttered sadly that if the hen died, then there would be no one left to lay eggs for him anymore. Hearing that reason, the demon chicken silently decided that maybe it would actually be better off dying right now. Meanwhile, the story shifted to a distant place high in the mountains, where a series of magnificent palaces belonging to a powerful master stood quietly among the clouds. Several disciples rushed into the hall with tears streaming down their faces, desperately reporting to their master about the tragic fate of their fellow brother. They told the patriarch that their senior brother had been killed by a reckless fool from the Lin family. With grief and anger in their voices, they begged their master to avenge him. A calm and steady voice soon echoed through the hall. Master Jasper gently told them to stop crying. Speaking softly and patiently, he reassured them that he would handle the matter and help them settle the score. The disciples continued sobbing loudly, their cries echoing throughout the entire sect, making the elder feel mentally exhausted. Every time he saw people crying in front of him like this, he felt completely overwhelmed and unsure how to deal with it. His heart was simply too soft. Whenever someone begged him with tears in their eyes, he found it extremely difficult to refuse them. As he quietly wondered about Levi's current whereabouts, a few tears even slipped down his own face. The students nearby whispered among themselves. Ever since their master came out of seclusion after his recent breakthrough, he had become far more easygoing. They joked quietly that whenever they cried loudly enough, the master would agree to almost anything, especially since he enjoyed the pastries they often made for him. Still, they could only sigh at how gentle their master had become. Meanwhile, Levi walked slowly along the road while carrying the rooster carefully in his arms, quietly blaming himself for failing to protect it despite promising that he would. Suddenly, the rooster coughed violently and spat out a mouthful of blood. The sight made both elders nearby widen their eyes in shock. Levi immediately became overjoyed when he realized the hen was still alive. Meanwhile, the rooster muttered weakly to itself that perhaps dying would have been less troublesome. One of the elders quickly checked the rooster's pulse and reported that the injuries were extremely severe. He angrily blamed Hans for being excessively cruel, recalling how brutally he had beaten little Rosalie and caused serious internal damage. Arthur could only continue grieving for his granddaughter, his voice filled with sorrow as he spoke about Rosalie's critical condition. Elder Yusef's next words struck Arthur like a bolt of thunder. With a heavy expression, he admitted that he had no way to save Rosalie. Arthur immediately broke down in tears, blaming himself for being useless and unable to protect his beloved granddaughter. Just then, Levi's mother suddenly spoke up, offering a glimmer of hope. She asked Elder Yusef if he remembered the heavenly origin sacred lotus from the sacred warrior realm. She reminded him that according to legend, even the faint fragrance of that sacred lotus was said to have the power to bring a dying person back to life. Both elders were stunned for a moment before the memory finally returned to them. Levi's mother then took out a small box and suggested that they use the treasure stored inside the spatial ring. Her idea was for Levi to travel to the sacred warrior realm and exchange that treasure for the heavenly origin sacred lotus. She explained softly that Rosalie was like a daughter to her, someone she had watched grow up with her own eyes. Because of that, she was willing to sacrifice the treasure if Elder Youssef could keep it safe until the exchange. Elder Youssef nodded in agreement with his daughter-in-law, saying that saving Rosalie was the most important thing right now. After thinking for a moment, he decided that Levi should personally travel to the sacred warrior realm and trade the spatial ring for the sacred lotus. Levi's mother gently handed him the treasure, reminding him that this item might be the only thing capable of saving the girl's life. Levi carefully passed the rooster into Arthur's arms and then reached out to accept the precious treasure. However, just as his fingers were about to touch it, a metal chain suddenly shot out from behind him and snatched the treasure away. After spinning through the air, the treasure landed neatly in the hands of a man who began laughing loudly. He commented that it was indeed the famous treasure of the Lin clan, the spatial code relic of the sacred warrior. Youssef clenched his teeth in anger. The moment he saw this man appear, he realized that the patriarch of the Chongtang sect must have already been alerted. The man introduced himself calmly as Dorian, an inner disciple of the Chongtang sect. He explained that he had overheard their conversation about going to the sacred warrior realm to exchange the treasure for the sacred lotus. Elder Youssef immediately objected, stating firmly that the spatial ring was a treasured possession of their family and could not simply be taken away by others. He demanded that it be returned at once. But Dorian merely brushed aside the demand with a dismissive smile, reminding them that the Chongtang sect and their clan had always been enemies in the sacred warrior realm. He claimed that his master had already given them permission to seize the spatial scroll and bring it back to the sacred warrior realm. With a casual motion, he tossed the treasure behind him where it landed neatly in the hands of another disciple, Fian, the third disciple of the Chongtang sect. Fian lazily covered his mouth with his folding fan and said with a mocking smile that in their territory, all valuable things belonged only to the Chongtang sect. No one else had the right to claim what their lord desired. Youssef could only grit his teeth helplessly. Seeing another disciple appear, he began to fear that Levi had truly provoked the Chongtang sect patriarch to personally intervene today. Suddenly, a sharp blade appeared at Levi's neck. It belonged to Kai, the second disciple of the Chongtang sect. After studying Levi for a moment, he realized that this was the once foolish grandson of the Lin family who had suddenly awakened his abilities. Kai remarked that Levi now had the reputation of a cultivator stronger than a warrior king. With a cold smile, he attempted to attack him. Levi's family cried out in horror, convinced that the boy was about to die. However, the moment Kai's blade touched Levi, it suddenly snapped in half with a sharp cracking sound. The sudden shattering of his blade shocked Kai so deeply that he instinctively jumped backward, quickly retreating several steps away from Levi, just to put a safe distance between them. With a tense expression, he admitted that Levi had actually broken a weapon forged with his own blood essence. Realizing the terrifying difference in strength, he openly stated that even if the three disciples joined forces together, they still would not be able to defeat Levi. Trying to steady himself, he quickly reassured the others that there was no need to panic, because their master had already arrived. Moments later, everyone turned their attention toward the entrance as a tall figure slowly stepped into the courtyard of the Lin manor. The other members of the Lin family could not hide their fear. Their faces grew pale as they stared at the newcomer, fully aware that someone extremely powerful had just appeared. The man who had arrived was none other than Jasper, the supreme elder of the Chongtang sect and the respected chief of the Immaculate Mountain. Despite his legendary status, Jasper looked surprisingly young. His handsome features and calm expression made him appear far younger than the age people believed him to be. Elders Youssef and Arthur were drenched in cold sweat, their faces completely pale. They feared that Levi was truly doomed today, because no matter how talented the boy was, they believed he could never stand against someone as extraordinary as Jasper. In the martial arts world, power ruled everything, and only three great factions stood at the very top of that ruthless hierarchy. The first and most mysterious among them was the legendary Holy Land of Martial Arts. The second great power that dominated the martial world was the formidable Chongtang sect. The third powerful organization that balanced the others was the Military Alliance. This fighting alliance had been formed by many feudal lords and martial families who united together for their own protection and survival. The Lin family itself belonged to one of these factions. However, the Holy Martial Land and the Chongtang sect stood above the rest, supported by their supreme masters who remained as immovable as mountains, making no one dare challenge them. One was the mysterious leader of the Holy Martial Land, whose true face had never been seen by the world. The other was the Chongtang sect's master, Jasper, the teacher who had trained countless powerful warriors. Legends claimed that their abilities were so immense that their actions could shake heaven and earth itself. With a single gesture, they could destroy mountains, split rivers, and reduce their enemies to ashes. Overwhelmed by fear, Elder Yusef suddenly knelt down before Jasper and pleaded with him to spare Levi, the only remaining heir of the Lin family. Dorian burst into laughter at the sight. He mocked them, saying that they had finally learned to fear his master, but unfortunately it was already too late. According to him, the entire Lin clan would have to pay with their lives for the death of their senior brother. Levi's mother and Arthur also stepped forward, begging Jasper with trembling voices. They even declared that they were willing to sacrifice their own lives if it meant saving Levi. However, Dorian simply shook his head coldly. In his view, letting them go was impossible, because doing so would damage the reputation and dignity of his master. He warned them in a chilling tone that since matters had already reached this point, none of them would be able to escape death today. Suddenly, Jasper's eyes lit up with curiosity. He slowly raised his hand and pointed toward a man standing quietly behind Arthur. Levi and Jasper locked eyes across the courtyard, both of them sensing something strangely familiar about the other's presence. A moment later, recognition dawned on both of them at the same time. Their faces brightened instantly as they excitedly called out each other's names. Without hesitation, Levi rushed forward and Jasper did the same. The two embraced warmly, their joyful reunion looking almost like that of lovers who had finally met again after a very long separation. Watching Levi greet Jasper so affectionately left the three Chongtang disciples completely stunned. They almost felt like banging their heads on the ground, unable to believe what they were seeing. Levi then cheerfully introduced Jasper to his family as his best friend. Meanwhile, Elder Yusef stood there in complete shock, wondering how Levi could casually address someone as powerful as Jasper by his first name. Jasper also pulled Levi closer and proudly introduced him to his disciples, telling them that Levi was his closest friend from a world they had never even heard about. The three Chongtang disciples immediately turned pale. Seeing how familiar Levi was with their master, they began wondering if Levi had already reached the mysterious divine realm. Realizing the seriousness of their mistake, the three disciples instantly fell to their knees. Pressing their foreheads to the ground, they began desperately apologizing to Levi for their earlier disrespect. However, Jasper's attention quickly shifted to the wounded chicken. Seeing its thin body covered in injuries, he nearly broke down emotionally. Tears filled his eyes as he lamented that he had lost the golden needle that could have healed it. Levi quickly comforted him, assuring Jasper that they would surely find another golden needle someday. He also said not to worry too much, because they could still use the treasure inside the small wooden box to trade for something capable of saving the chicken. Hearing their plan, the rooster immediately panicked inside. It suddenly realized that if these two really tried to save him, his peaceful death might never come. After discussing the situation, Jasper walked over to Arthur and gently took the injured rooster from his arms. Kai nervously approached Levi, his face full of fear, and respectfully handed back the small box that had been stolen earlier. Once everything was settled, Levi nodded and calmly said that now everything was finally prepared. He then explained to the family that they would use the treasure box to exchange for something capable of saving the chicken's life. Elder Yusef and the others immediately agreed with the plan, seeing no better option available. Jasper turned to his three disciples and instructed them to remain behind and wait for his return while he accompanied Levi to complete the exchange. The disciples watched in confusion, quietly wondering what strange charm this young woman possessed that could make their normally serious master treat her so warmly. The rooster, clearly annoyed by everything happening around him, simply closed his eyes and tried his best to ignore their conversation. Jasper leaned closer to the rooster and gently promised that he would definitely find a way to save him. Meanwhile, Jasper's three apprentices felt even more confused and upset. Their master had never shown the slightest interest in women before, yet now he was personally carrying a young woman with him everywhere. They worried that his reputation might suffer. At that moment, Dorian suddenly felt a strange sensation, as if someone nearby was staring directly at him. When they looked up and saw Levi watching them calmly, they immediately began to rethink the situation. They quickly convinced themselves that Levi must also have feelings for the girl currently in their master's arms. Meanwhile, Levi and Jasper happily talked about how the hen would surely recover soon, and that her eggs would probably taste just as delicious as before. Hearing this, the rooster silently cursed, feeling that dying might actually be better than being saved. Before long, Levi and Jasper said their goodbyes to the family and prepared to leave the residence. The three disciples knelt respectfully at the gate, seeing their master off and hoping he would return soon. After watching the two figures disappear into the distance, Arthur turned toward Elder Youssef and quietly asked if he had any thoughts about what had just happened. He reminded Youssef that the young master had once used special medicine to bring him back from the brink of death. Arthur wondered aloud why they could not try using that same medicine again to save Rosalie. Hearing this, both Elder Youssef and Levi's mother were suddenly stunned. One of Jasper's disciples quickly explained that medicines capable of reviving the dead were extremely rare and valuable. Most likely, such medicine had already been completely used up, and Elder Youssef probably remembered that clearly. The elder and Levi's mother could only nod silently. Meanwhile, the story shifted to a lively street where Levi and Jasper were walking side by side. People passing by looked at them with great curiosity. Many of them began whispering among themselves, debating whether the man walking there was truly the legendary Jasper. Some also recognized Levi from the Lin family walking beside him. At the same time, Camila approached Elder Youssef, asking him if he knew where the Holy Land of Martial Arts was located and how one could reach it. Hearing such a sudden and serious question, Elder Youssef stood there in shock, unable to respond immediately. Meanwhile, Jasper's disciples confidently declared that since Levi was now traveling with their master, there was absolutely nothing for anyone to worry about. The members of the Lin family could only watch this strange development with puzzled expressions, wondering why the Chong Tang disciples had still not left. Just then, Kai suddenly appeared in front of Arthur and the rooster without warning. The three disciples then offered their assistance sincerely, saying that they were willing to give Rosalie several rejuvenating pills. They even joked that although their master was already older, marrying someone as powerful as him would be like gaining a priceless treasure. With their help, they suggested, Lady Rosalie might become even more elegant and refined in the future. Every member of the Lin family froze in shock after hearing such an outrageous proposal. Their eyes widened, and the courtyard fell silent as they struggled to process what had just been suggested. The rooster, lying weakly nearby, burned with anger inside. In his mind, he raged at how these shameless people dared to humiliate him so openly. After all, he reminded himself fiercely, he was originally a man. The thought of being treated like some helpless woman made him even more furious, and he had absolutely no intention of accepting such an insult. Meanwhile, far away from that scene, Levi suddenly let out a loud sneeze. Jasper immediately turned toward him with concern and asked if he had caught a cold. Levi shook his head and casually explained that sneezing did not always mean illness. According to his old director, it could also mean that someone somewhere was talking about him behind his back. Scratching his head, Levi wondered why that old director still remembered him. In truth, however, the director simply did not wish to mention the existence of those two mysterious immortals again. After walking for a while, Jasper suddenly frowned and realized he had completely forgotten where they were supposed to go. Levi paused to think and said it was something like the Holy Land of Martial Arts. Hearing that, Jasper slapped his forehead and exclaimed that he had finally remembered. He clarified that they needed to carry the wooden box and exchange it for something valuable. However, as he lifted the box again, Jasper frowned and complained that it felt incredibly heavy. He wondered aloud if they would really have to carry it all the way there. Meanwhile, back at the manor, the rooster lay there fuming silently. He could not help wondering what terrible karma he must have accumulated in life to end up suffering through such ridiculous torment. At the same time, Jasper's disciples secretly discussed their situation. They believed they had already spent plenty of money and effort preparing what they thought would become the perfect bride for their master. However, after thinking it over, they slowly realized something troubling. Their master probably had absolutely no idea how to properly take care of a girl. After a moment of thought, Theon concluded that if they truly cared about their master's happiness, then they might have to take responsibility and handle everything themselves. The other disciples sighed deeply, quietly worrying that their master might end up spending his entire life alone if things continued like this. They also remembered that the Lin family had already sacrificed a valuable martial arts scroll earlier in exchange for life-saving medicine. Eventually, realizing it was getting late, they decided it was time to rest. It also happened to be Theon's turn to watch over Rosalie for the night. The rooster glanced at everyone around him with clear disdain, silently hoping that this strange and exhausting situation would finally come to an end soon. Meanwhile, the scene returned to Levi and Jasper, who were still traveling together. Jasper continued complaining about how heavy the box they were carrying felt. Levi opened the box and calmly explained that the real weight was not the container itself, but the item stored inside. He then took out the scroll and casually released a burst of black flames, instantly burning the martial technique into ashes. After destroying it, Levi observed that the box immediately became much lighter, since the heavy object inside had been removed. Jasper nodded with curiosity and tried lifting the box again. To his delight, it truly had become significantly lighter. Levi then asked casually if Jasper was hungry. Jasper replied that he was not particularly hungry, though strangely he admitted that since arriving in this strange place, his appetite had felt a little unsettled. After thinking about it briefly, Jasper suggested they should simply continue their journey, since neither of them actually needed food or sleep at the moment. Levi quickly agreed. However, neither of them actually knew the exact route to the holy land of martial arts. With no better plan, they simply continued walking forward confidently. As they moved further along the road, Levi's figure gradually became blurry, almost as if he were fading out of sight. Jasper blinked in surprise as Levi suddenly disappeared right in front of his eyes without any warning. Back at home, Levi's family sat on the porch calmly eating sunflower seeds. Elder Youssef sighed worriedly, remembering that the holy land of martial arts was hundreds of thousands of miles away from their city. He wondered how long the journey might take. Levi's mother expressed her own concern, saying she never expected the boys to reach the destination instantly. She simply hoped they would not end up wandering aimlessly from one forest to another. Arthur nodded and agreed with her. He said that if all three elders had been present earlier, they might have sent someone more experienced to guide them. Unfortunately, they could neither stop the boys nor persuade them otherwise. Far away from their home, hundreds of thousands of miles away, a massive temple stood proudly beneath the sky. A huge sign above its gate clearly displayed its name, the sacred place of martial arts. Suddenly, Levi's figure appeared there out of nowhere. In the blink of an eye, he had already reached the entrance of the sacred martial land. Levi looked around the area in confusion, wondering where Jasper had gone. In the next instant, Levi's figure flickered again, and he suddenly found himself back where he had originally been standing. He looked around and called out Jasper's name loudly. Levi searched everywhere, even walking beneath the nearby trees while continuing to call for Jasper. Suddenly his body flashed once more, and he appeared directly behind Jasper. Jasper turned around with relief when he saw Levi again. He asked why Levi had suddenly disappeared and said he had been searching for him the whole time. Levi then noticed a large bird nearby and curiously asked what it was doing there. Jasper explained that he had encountered the bird earlier in the forest and tried asking it where Levi had gone. At first, the bird refused to respond, but after Jasper lightly tapped it, the creature quickly agreed to guide him while searching for Levi. Levi examined the large bird closely and noticed that tears were streaming from its eyes. It turned out to be a lunar eclipse vulture. Inside its mind, the vulture was trembling. It wondered where these strange humans had obtained such terrifying power, since even a casual slap from them was enough to defeat her. Still, the vulture secretly swore that she would remember this humiliation and find a chance to take revenge someday. Meanwhile, the two boys were already sitting comfortably on the bird's back while chatting. Jasper mentioned that he had once visited the holy land of martial arts before and promised they would arrive quickly. Yet he found it strange that they had not arrived yet. The bird was so angry that it could barely contain itself. In its mind it screamed that humans were truly shameless. After all, the holy land of martial arts was hundreds of thousands of miles away from the demonic beast forest in the east. Jasper scratched his head, wondering how they had somehow traveled so quickly already. Suddenly Levi stood up and suggested that he could simply take Jasper directly to the holy land of martial arts. Jasper's eyes lit up with excitement. Delighted by the idea, he grabbed Levi's hand as Levi activated his spatial power and transported them instantly to another location. The giant bird soon realized in horror that it had also been dragged along with them during the teleportation. In the sky behind them, only a sparkling point of light remained where they had disappeared. In the next instant, they appeared right in front of the sacred place of martial arts, startling a small kitten that had been peacefully chasing butterflies nearby. The sudden teleportation happened so quickly that the giant bird immediately felt dizzy and nauseous from the intense motion. Jasper laughed happily and praised Levi for possessing such incredible spatial abilities. Meanwhile, the poor bird was still struggling to regain its balance and clear its spinning head. The two boys walked forward without noticing that their unwilling mount was still suffering badly behind them. The bird thought bitterly about how it had reached the peak of the martial emperor realm, yet it could barely survive that journey, while these two seemed completely unaffected. Despite the nausea still shaking her body, the bird reluctantly followed behind them. Jasper turned around to glance at the bird and commented that it looked rather uncomfortable. Levi suggested that they should simply go inside the sacred land themselves and leave the bird outside. Hearing this, the bird wondered if it should try escaping, though it doubted it could outrun people with spatial powers. Just as they approached the entrance, an invisible defensive formation suddenly stopped them. Jasper immediately noticed that some kind of powerful barrier was preventing them from entering the sacred grounds. At the same time, alarms echoed throughout the city, announcing that unknown intruders had triggered the defensive formation of the Holy Land. The guards stationed around the formation quickly sensed that something unusual had happened. Without wasting a moment, they rushed to report the disturbance to the ruler of the sacred grounds, the Holy Lord. The Holy Lord calmly sensed the disturbance through the defensive formation. After a brief moment of observation, he reassured the attendants that there was no need to panic. He said he would personally go and see who dared to approach the sacred grounds uninvited. Meanwhile, Levi stood before the invisible barrier and curiously placed his hand on the formation, studying the strange defensive energy that blocked their path. A moment later, Levi reached forward and firmly grabbed the invisible barrier, as if he were holding something solid in his hands. At first, Levi thought he could easily crush the barrier and break through it. However, just as he prepared to do so, a dignified voice suddenly echoed through the air and stopped him. The voice introduced itself calmly. It belonged to Moai, the Holy Lord who governed this sacred martial arts ground. He politely asked the two visitors not to damage the defensive formation protecting the city. Levi slowly released his grip on the barrier, then lifted the wooden box and explained that they had come to the holy land of martial arts hoping to exchange it for the heavenly origin sacred lotus. Standing beside him, Jasper enthusiastically added that they were trying to save someone who was in grave danger. Moai listened carefully and assumed that Jasper of the Chongtang sect must have come here seeking the sacred lotus to rescue someone important. After thinking for a moment, Moai asked whether the treasure they brought was truly worthy of such a rare exchange. Using his spiritual power, he examined the chest carefully. Recently, he had heard rumors that Jasper had become friends with a young man from the Lin family named Levi. Seeing the two together, he suspected that the boy must indeed belong to the Lin clan. However, when Moai finally opened the box to inspect its contents, he suddenly realized that it was completely empty. His expression instantly changed. Turning toward Levi and Jasper, He demanded to know what exactly they intended to exchange with him. Levi and Jasper looked at each other in confusion. Then both of them quietly pointed toward the empty box, as if that should explain everything. Seeing this, Moai's face immediately darkened. His voice turned icy as he asked whether they truly believed they could come to his sacred land and mock him so openly. Levi and Jasper were completely confused by his reaction. They asked honestly whether the box itself could be used as the item for exchange. Moai's patience finally snapped. In a burst of anger, he crushed the wooden box in his hand and angrily accused Jasper of bullying him and making a mockery of the sacred martial land. Meanwhile, 2 disciples ran through the holy city in panic, reporting to others that the Holy Lord had already begun fighting with uninvited outsiders and that reinforcements might be needed immediately. However, a man wearing a cloak calmly advised them not to rush forward recklessly. Considering the cultivation level of the attackers, he warned that interfering too soon could make things worse. After discussing the situation briefly, they decided it would be wiser to wait quietly and follow the Holy Lord's instructions. From a distance, many disciples watched nervously as the confrontation began. Levi stepped forward and engaged Moai in battle, while Jasper simply stood nearby, observing the fight with interest. Moai noticed that Jasper showed no intention of interfering in the fight at all. He assumed that even if Levi had reached the level of a saint warrior, defeating him would still not be difficult. But to his shock, Levi suddenly threw a powerful strike that landed directly on Moai. Moai had not expected the attack to carry such terrifying strength. The impact sent a violent shockwave through his body, forcing him to stagger backward while coughing up a mouthful of blood. At that moment, Moai realized with horror that Levi's cultivation level had already surpassed his own. He could hardly believe that such a powerful young warrior from the Lin family was now standing right in front of him. Moai suddenly remembered something his father had once told him before passing away, that only someone who had surpassed the saint stage could truly help them. Looking closely at Levi, Moai noticed the strange purity in his expression. It was a calm and innocent look that ordinary warriors rarely possessed. After thinking carefully for a moment, Moai asked whether they wanted the heavenly origin sacred lotus in order to save someone's life. Levi and Jasper both nodded eagerly. Seeing their determination, Moai decided that he would set a condition for the exchange. He calmly declared that if Levi truly wished to obtain the sacred lotus, then the young man who had defeated him must agree to marry his daughter. Both Levi and Jasper stared at him in confusion. Levi quickly replied that he had no interest in getting married. Suddenly Jasper had an idea. Since Levi needed time to focus on cultivation and refused the proposal, perhaps he himself could marry Moai's daughter instead. Hearing this absurd suggestion, Moai angrily shouted that no one would want to marry a 1,000-year-old monster like Jasper. Jasper turned to Levi and jokingly said he was willing to take the responsibility if Levi refused. Levi quietly wondered whether saving the chicken was really worth all this trouble. Meanwhile, the story returned briefly to the Lin family estate. The rooster, slowly recovering from his injuries, suddenly sneezed loudly. Jasper's disciples panicked when they heard the sound. Worried about their new future mistress, they quickly rushed over and offered several rejuvenation pills. The rooster shivered helplessly in the corner, feeling an uncomfortable chill run through his body. Meanwhile, far away, Levi noticed Jasper's disappointed expression after he suggested abandoning the rescue. Feeling guilty, Levi finally changed his mind and agreed to marry Moai's daughter, though he looked extremely reluctant. Seeing Levi's miserable expression made Moai tremble with anger. Moai then calmed himself and invited them inside the sacred residence. He explained that after Levi married his daughter, they would present the heavenly origin sacred lotus. Nearby, the giant bird still lay quietly on the ground, secretly wondering whether it should try to escape. Elsewhere inside the sacred grounds, the great protector was calmly strolling through a peaceful garden. One of the servants hurried toward him in panic and asked whether it was true that the holy maiden was going to be married to some unknown barbarian outsider. The great protector was stunned when he learned that the Holy Lord intended to marry his daughter to Levi, the same outsider from the Lin family who had just intruded upon their sacred land. Meanwhile, Levi wandered through the gardens admiring the beautiful flowers growing everywhere. The giant bird slowly followed behind him, still wondering if it should take the chance to run away. Suddenly, a graceful young girl appeared before them. She introduced herself politely as Aluna, the holy maiden of the sacred martial grounds, explaining that her father had sent her to welcome them. Realizing she was Moai's daughter, Levi greeted her politely. Jasper, however, immediately complimented her beauty with great enthusiasm. Aluna calmly informed them that the wedding ceremony would take place in 3 days on the sacred martial field. After the ceremony, she would follow her father's orders and give them the heavenly origin sacred lotus. The news spread rapidly throughout the city, quickly becoming the main topic of conversation among the residents. Early the next morning, another alarming report arrived. Powerful demon beasts and thousands of demonic creatures had surrounded the mountain gate of the Chongtang sect for reasons no one yet understood. If the situation escalated, the sect might soon face the greatest crisis since the day it was founded. Upon hearing the news, Dorian decided to travel to the holy land of martial arts to find his master and see how those demonic beasts would react in his presence. 3 days passed quickly, and the long-awaited moment finally arrived. The wedding ceremony between Levi and the holy maiden Aluna. Standing proudly before the crowd, the master of ceremonies loudly invited the bride and groom to enter. Levi and Aluna slowly walked through the grand hall toward the ceremonial altar where the ritual would take place. Nearby, the Great Protector released a terrifying aura that made the air feel heavy. Moai quietly wondered whether the man had discovered that he was only pretending to be at the saint stage. Feeling nervous, Moai silently prayed that Lady Aluna would somehow protect him, promising himself that he would stop pretending once the true Holy Lord appeared. Just as the priest was about to begin the ceremony, Levi suddenly interrupted him and asked everyone to wait a moment. Levi looked around the hall carefully, but Jasper was nowhere to be seen. Someone quietly informed Levi that Jasper had been urgently called back to deal with a serious problem. A massive group of demonic beasts had gathered near the Chongtang sect. A deep shadow of sadness quietly spread across Levi's face. The lively atmosphere around him seemed to fade as a heavy emotion settled in his eyes, as if something troubling had suddenly crossed his mind. Levi explained softly that Jasper was not just an ordinary companion to him. Jasper was his closest friend, someone he trusted like a brother. Long ago, he had promised that he would protect him whenever danger appeared. He admitted that he was worried Jasper might run into trouble while facing the demonic beasts. Because of that, he planned to rush over, lend a hand for a short moment, and then come straight back as quickly as possible. The moment Levi finished speaking, his body flickered like a flash of light. In the blink of an eye, his figure vanished from the room, leaving nothing but a faint ripple of energy behind. Everyone present stood frozen in surprise. None of them had expected things to suddenly unfold in such a strange and unbelievable way. After all, the wedding ceremony had only just begun. Levi had casually promised that he would return after helping his friend, but leaving at such a moment still felt completely unbelievable to the guests. Aluna trembled violently with anger, her whole body shaking as rage built inside her chest. She cursed Levi under her breath, unable to believe his excuse that Jasper, who had already reached the peak of the saint realm, needed help dealing with a few demonic beasts. With bitter sarcasm, she muttered that Levi clearly had his own priorities. Their wedding was about to begin, yet he was still worrying about his friend. Meanwhile, she herself had relied on her brother all this time, waiting patiently until the day she would finally be married. At the same time, Jasper arrived at the massive gates of the Chunong sect. The moment he appeared, several peak realm demonic beast kings charged toward him with terrifying speed, eager to tear him apart. However, the instant they attacked, a glowing protective light formed around Jasper's body. The demonic beast slammed into the barrier with force, only to recoil backward, injured and disoriented. The captured bird looked extremely displeased. Not only had this man caught her against her will, but now he was forcing her to participate in battles against demons as well. Watching the scene with admiration, Dorian praised his master loudly. Using nothing but a sphere of primordial energy as protection, Jasper had already wounded several powerful demonic beasts, proof of the overwhelming strength of a true master. Just then, a huge bird stepped forward slowly, moving closer toward the frightened demonic beasts that surrounded the area. She warned them in a firm voice that if they valued their freedom, they should leave immediately. Otherwise, they might end up captured just like she had been. Tears began to gather in her eyes as she glanced back toward the others. With a heavy heart, she said a quiet farewell to her brothers before turning away. Suddenly Levi appeared beside Jasper as if he had stepped out of thin air. He immediately asked if Jasper had been hurt. Jasper stared at him in surprise and asked why he had come here when today was supposed to be his wedding day. Levi explained that he couldn't stop worrying. He feared Jasper might get injured while fighting the demonic beasts, so after informing everyone at the ceremony, he hurried over to help. Jasper calmly suggested that they should both return now. As the sect leader, he reminded Levi that keeping one's word was important, especially on such an important day. Levi gave a reluctant nod, clearly feeling a little embarrassed. Without saying anything more, he turned and left the place together with Jasper. Before disappearing, Jasper casually handed the captured bird to his student. Then his figure blurred and vanished from sight in the next instant. Dorian didn't even have time to respond before his master was gone. Looking down at the powerful bird in front of him, he couldn't help but doubt whether he could really handle a creature that ranked far above him. Back at the wedding ceremony, all the guests had finally gathered. Levi calmly reassured everyone that Jasper was perfectly fine now, so the ceremony could continue without worry. Hearing this, the master of ceremonies stepped forward with a solemn expression and officially announced that the wedding ceremony would now begin. The man began delivering the traditional ceremonial speech. However, Levi stood there looking distracted and clearly uninterested, as if his thoughts were somewhere far away. While listening absent-mindedly, Levi suddenly noticed something unusual. Aluna's expression looked strange, cold, tense, and far from the joy one would expect on such a day. The master of ceremonies continued speaking, saying that fate itself and the earth beneath their feet had guided their paths together so that they could meet and become husband and wife. Standing quietly behind Levi, Jasper gave his friend a supportive look, silently encouraging him to stay calm and finish the ceremony properly. At that moment, Jasper suddenly remembered something he had once heard on TV about wedding traditions and the importance of giving gifts to newlyweds. A sudden realization hit him. He hadn't brought any gift at all. Feeling a little embarrassed, he decided he should quickly prepare something meaningful for Levi. Soon the master of ceremonies raised his voice and announced the next step. The newlyweds were now expected to bow respectfully to heaven and earth. As Levi prepared to bow during the ritual, a strange feeling suddenly crept into his mind. Something felt missing, though he couldn't immediately figure out what. When he turned his head slightly to look around, he realized that Jasper was nowhere to be seen anymore. Levi quickly asked the others where Jasper had gone. Someone explained that Jasper had rushed off to prepare a gift for the groom and had run toward the nearby mountains. They also warned Levi that beyond the sacred martial arts mountain lived many dangerous demonic beasts. Entering that area without preparation could easily become life-threatening. Hearing this, Levi asked everyone to wait just a little longer. Without hesitation, he hurried away again to search for Jasper. Watching him leave once more, Aluna's body released a chilling, murderous aura. Disappointment and anger toward Levi filled her heart completely. Meanwhile, deep inside the forest, something strange was happening. Groups of demonic tigers were roaring loudly, shouting warnings to their relatives nearby. Two particularly vicious demonic beasts were cruelly tormenting small animals, playing with them as if their suffering meant nothing.